Hello, my name is Emrah Catic, and I'll be giving a reflection on my participation throughout this course. I personally thought my performance throughout the semester improved significantly, from my nervousness to my overall preparation and presentation throughout the various speeches that I gave. The reason I improved are because throughout this class, we just constantly and continuously did speeches, whether they be real speeches for a grade or impromptu speeches that we did every few days or so. To begin, I want to reflect on my speaking and delivery skills. When I first started this class, I will admit, I was very uncomfortable and very nervous about presenting in front of an audience. I had no prior knowledge or experience with public speaking, so this class was truly a first for me. Regardless of there being less than 20 people staring at me, it still felt like a million eyes were pointed towards me. So with this in mind, I specifically wanted to improve heavily on my nervousness. With my first speech, I was very nervous, very scared, very quiet, and very unprepared. I felt like it was the worst speech on the planet, but I didn't let that stop me from improving, obviously. With the first speech, all I did for preparation was read it back to myself once or twice the day of the speech. And it was an alright tactic, but I still had many ums and pauses in the speech itself. So for the second speech, I needed to find a way to more efficiently prepare. So when it came time to have the speech, I called over my buddy Harris, and to prepare for even better for this speech, I presented my speech to him in person, and he told me, he was as brutally honest as possible, and he told me when I did the ums, when I paused, and when I hesitated and stuff. He helped me pick out those awkward pauses and such. This helped me significantly for my next speech. Although with my second speech, I did a topic I was very comfortable with, which helped with my confidence when speaking. Overall, this is a huge mix of everything that helped me make my second speech significantly better and more impactful on the audience. For my final speech, I went all in, and when it came to preparing for myself, speaking and everything in between, I studied my script, I studied the topic, and I chose a topic that I really agreed with and heavily am biased towards. My last speech was about why Lil Pump is the best rapper of our generation. I've always been a fan, so speaking about this really helped me excel in my production and presentation of the speech. Overall, I feel most content with my speaking skills because ever since this class, talking to strangers and people within my classes has been so much easier. Just from looking at them and listening to what they have to say, to me helps me develop conversations. A real-world example was literally the same day that I gave my final speech, the persuasive speech. I had a 9:30 a.m. class, and we were doing stations with random people. I was in a group with this other student, and she mentioned something about politics, and after me asking her a few specific questions about politics, we had a pretty solid and intellectual conversation. I apply it to my courses currently because I am a business major. All of my classes require in-class participation. This meaning answering various questions out loud when the teacher asks them. So prior to this course, I was always the type to just sit there and never ask any questions, which would have a huge impact on my grade because I would never speak, so I lost participation points. But now I'm a lot more outgoing and active throughout the class due to this communications class, and that has significantly helped my grade in other classes. For audience analysis was something I never really considered prior to entering this class. I never thought it was something to consider when creating or presenting a speech, and to my surprise, it's just as important as targeting an audience in your paper, which I have done hundreds of times in various English classes. As stated on page 84 of the textbook, demographics are statistical information about characteristics such as age, race, gender, sexual orientation, education level, and religious views of a population such as an audience. And that's from the authors, Bebe. This is important because you will need certain demographics to help analyze your audience. For me, as an example, during my persuasive speech, I asked various questions before the persuading took place to find out who I needed to target more and give more engagement towards. So I did so by asking questions like, how many of you actually like Lil Pump's music? And then when the audience raised their hand, I obviously noticed who raised their hand, and with this, I learned who was interested in his music and who isn't. With the people who weren't interested in his music, I focused more on trying to persuade them into finding his music more appealing. Again, prior to this class, I didn't think audience analysis was a thing, let alone important. I've learned throughout this course that audience analysis is probably just as important as writing and practicing the speech itself. This being because if you can't analyze your audience, and if you can't find who you were trying to target your message to, there really is no point in presenting the speech. The biggest challenge for me, at least, was trying to keep them focused and interested in what I was talking about. For example, for my marijuana legalization speech, I felt like not as many people were interested, and due to this, I got nervous and my mouth got super dry. It was a topic that interested me, but my audience probably couldn't care less on whether or not it was legalized. This can be applied to real world in hundreds of ways, but one example that I personally experienced was quite comedic. At the Cougar Den here on campus, there was a comedian who was performing. He was a homosexual comedian from Los Angeles, California. The thing about him was that he was making homosexual jokes and about various positioning and other things along those lines at a Catholic university, may I add. Most of the audience felt offended, and he knew this by the reaction of some of his jokes that he made. I personally thought it was hilarious because I can take a joke, but I could see where people could get offended or disgusted. And because of this, audience analysis is very important, because if you don't analyze your audience, you could fail miserably or embarrass yourself, which I feel like the comedian did. Finally, for listening is just as important as speaking. The whole point of giving a speech or attending a speech is to listen and either learn something new or gain more knowledge of something you weren't comfortable with initially. One problem with listening is listed on page 60, and it states, listening, researchers have developed what they call the working memory theory of listening, which explains why we sometimes just don't listen. The theory suggests that when a listener's capacity is reached, then it's harder to concentrate and remember what we hear. With this quote, it is understandable why people have trouble listening. One problem I had with my informative speech was when I piled up a ton of statistical information about various benefits and drawbacks of marijuana legalization. This information could have been too much information for one's brain to handle at one time. It could have been overwhelming for the audience, which is why I felt like people weren't listening. I learned that listening is, again, almost as important as conveying the speech itself. Even from an audience point of view, understanding a speech could help benefit you in various ways, depending on the type of speech being given. Some skills that I applied to keep my audience listening and engaged were during my persuasive speech. I split up a lot of the content with either a question, a video excerpt, or even a little comedic phrase. I feel like this did well because I noticed a lot of people keeping direct eye contact with either me or my PowerPoint screen. For my own personal listening, I just tried not to focus on anything but the speech, and whenever the speaker asked for any questions or anything along those lines, I always tried to engage with the speaker or answer the question. This was especially relevant on the persuasive speeches. General education had made a large impact on my speeches and my presentations because it was just significantly easier to put everything together and make everything flow effectively. With English classes, it taught me how to target my audience in various papers, and with this skill, it was easy to transfer over to this class because in this class we need to analyze various audiences as well. Overall, with all of my classes, they all pitched in somehow to make this class significantly easier. For example, my business classes helped me master APA and MLA format, which were needed throughout the various speeches when we needed to cite our sources. Which was needed in various papers again, like the informative and persuasive as an example. Basically, anything I've learned throughout college so far has benefited me in completing this class with an A grade currently. Overall, this class helped me significantly with my speaking goal, which was to be less nervous when presenting speeches and even speaking towards crowds. It helped me lessen the anxiety that I had previously of public speaking, and it overall benefited my life significantly, because now I'm a lot more outgoing and socially interactive. If I could, I would take this class again just to further master my public speaking. Thank you, Professor Wagner, for a great year in teaching me all this information and the skills needed to become an effective speaker and listener.